My neighbor's Chihuahua is the Antichrist. I had always considered myself a reasonable person. I liked my routines, I liked my quiet mornings with coffee in hand, and I liked the sense of control over my little apartment in the city, but that all changed the moment Daniel and I moved into our new place on Willow Lane. At first glance, the neighborhood seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, neighbors who smiled politely, and surprisingly affordable rent for the area, especially for a 3-bedroom apartment. We were excited. Daniel had just landed a job promotion, and I was about to start my freelance design projects full-time. We were finally feeling like adults who had it together. Then, there was Mrs. Patterson. Or rather, her dog. Mrs. Patterson wasn't the issue. I'll get to her in a second, but let me tell you about her Chihuahua, Tinker. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this tiny creature, no bigger than a loaf of bread, became the epicenter of every problem Daniel and I would face in the next 6 months. The first time I encountered Tinker, it was on our morning walk. I just stepped out with Daniel when the little yapping terror bolted out from under a bush. Its owner, an elderly woman with a very thin patience threshold, came running behind it, shouting, "Tinker! Stop!" "Tinker!" Daniel laughed nervously and held me back. "It's just a tiny dog. How bad could it be?" I wanted to laugh too, but the moment the Chihuahua lunged at my leg with teeth bared, yapping so fiercely that I could barely hear myself think, I knew Daniel had no idea what we were in for. I think it just wants to play, Daniel." Sud. Although his tone was shaky, I pulled my leg back and almost stumbled. Play? That was a full-on attack. Mrs. Patterson finally corralled her dog, stuffing it under her arms like it had done nothing wrong. "Oh, he's harmless. Don't worry about him," she said sweetly, though her eyes had a flash of irritation. That was the first red flag. At first the encounters were sporadic, a yip here, a bark there. But soon the chaos escalated. Tinker began showing up everywhere. Outside our apartment door, in the stairwell, even in our yard, which was clearly marked with private property signs. Daniel tried to reason with Mrs. Patterson politely. "Could you keep your dog on a leash? He keeps getting into our space." Her response was a mix of annoyance and condescension. "Tinker's just a little guy. He's harmless. You shouldn't be so dramatic." I hated the word dramatic at that moment. It made me feel like I was being gaslit. Daniel and I tried ignoring it, telling ourselves it was just a small inconvenience. But that tiny Chihuahua had other plans. It started with minor things. Tinker would sneak onto our porch and chew up Daniel's shoes that he kept next to the door. Once, it even broke into the house somehow and got into my grocery bags and ate an entire package of chocolate croissants I had bought for brunch with friends. It almost would have been impressive if they didn't cost over $10. The turning point came when Daniel, trying to be diplomatic, went to talk to Mrs. Patterson again. "We really need to address Tinker's behavior," he said. "He's broken into our apartment multiple times now and it's starting to feel unsafe." Mrs. Patterson scoffed. "Unsafe? It's a small dog, young man. You're overreacting. Just lock your door better." Daniel came home that evening pale and frustrated. "I tried to reason with her," he muttered. She's impossible." That's when I realized that this wasn't just about a small dog. This was about her. Mrs. Patterson had built this persona of being the sweet old lady next door. But underneath, she was manipulative, dismissive, and stubborn to the point of cruelty. And Tinker? He was her weapon. The next week, things escalated in ways I never could have imagined. One morning, I opened the front door to take out the trash and found Tinker sitting on our welcome mat, staring at me like he owned the place. Before I could react, he leaped at my legs again. I screamed. Daniel came running from the kitchen and grabbed him, but Tinker had already scratched my ankle. That was the first time I thought about calling animal control, but even that felt impossible. Every neighbor we talked to said, "Oh, Tinker's just a little dog, he's harmless." No one seemed to take us seriously. And so began a nightmare that would consume the next several months of our lives. What I didn't expect was that Tinker's attacks would get worse. Each incident seemed to embolden him. It was as if Mrs. Patterson had trained him to sense our fear. And worse, she had zero intention of controlling him. The first truly terrifying moment happened about a week later. Daniel and I had guests over our friends Lisa and Mark. We were sitting in the living room, wine in hand, trying to laugh off the earlier incidents, when a sudden scratching at the door made us pause. "Oh no, not again," Daniel groaned, already moving toward the door. Before anyone could react, the door cracked open and there was Tinker, sprinting past Daniel into the living room. He knocked over Mark's drink, darted under the couch, and yipped so loudly that it sounded like a car alarm. I froze in disbelief. How is this even possible? Lisa was laughing nervously, clearly unsure whether to help or panic. "Is that a Chihuahua?" "Yes, and it's a menace," Daniel said, chasing the dog. "Mark, can you help me get him out?" By the time we managed to corral him, Tinker had shredded one of Mark's throw pillows, chewed on Daniel's laptop charger, and left a trail of chaos across the carpet. I was shaking. "I can't keep living like this," I whispered, tears welling up. "Every day, it's something new." Daniel nodded, exhausted. "I know. I'll talk to her again. I swear I will." But Mrs. Patterson wasn't just unreasonable. She was strategic. She began denying everything, insisting Tinker hadn't come near us, or that we were exaggerating. "Dogs will be dogs, dear," she said one morning when I confronted her on the sidewalk. "You just need to learn to live with it." It wasn't just the physical damage that was frustrating, it was the mental toll. I started losing sleep, anxious that every time I opened the door, there would be chaos. Daniel tried to reassure me, but I could see the stress in his eyes too. We were both at our breaking points. After that incident, Daniel and I started keeping detailed logs of every encounter, with timestamps, photos, and videos. I don't think we even realized at the time that we were preparing for a battle that would push every limit of patience we had. And so, life with Tinker became a war. Every morning was a minefield. Every attempt to leave the apartment was a gamble. Every effort to get Mrs. Patterson to take responsibility felt like hitting a brick wall. But amidst all the chaos, there were small victories. Daniel and I learned to work together, strategizing around Tinker's attacks, fortifying our apartment, and documenting evidence. Each time the dog came, we got better at handling him. And slowly we realized we were not helpless. Little did we know the final showdown with Tinker and Mrs. Patterson was coming sooner than we imagined. By the third month, life with Tinker had become unbearable. I used to joke that our apartment had become a war zone, but the joke had long lost its humor. Every day there was a new battle, and Daniel and I were exhausted. It started small. The week a bark outside the window when I was trying to work, a scratch at the door that made me jump, but it quickly escalated. One evening, I was on a video call with a client, trying to appear professional, when Tinker somehow got inside again. He leapt onto my desk, knocking over my water bottle. The liquid spilled across my laptop keyboard. I screamed, "Daniel!" He came running, only to find Tinker barking at me, as if he were guarding some invisible treasure. I could feel my anger boiling over. How does he keep getting in? Daniel tried to stay calm, but I could see the strain on his face. "I don't know. I've checked the locks. Maybe he figured out something with the gate." That night, we spent hours trying to figure it out. We examined the door frame, the locks, and even the windows. Every time we thought we had the apartment secured, Tinker found a way in. It was like fighting a tiny, relentless ninja. Then came the public incident. I had gone out for coffee at a nearby cafe, laptop in hand, trying to work in peace. I was sitting on the patio, enjoying the sunshine and waiting for Daniel to join me when I noticed a familiar shadow across the street. Tinker. He was running toward me, yipping and barking like a tiny white storm of teeth and fury. I froze, unsure what to do. I could hear him racing closer, dodging pedestrians like he was trained. People began staring. Someone shouted, "Watch out!" But before I could react, he lunged at my ankle, sinking his tiny teeth into my sock. I yelped, hopping back. It took everything in me not to kick my foot on impulse. A man nearby scooped him up, trying to calm him. Whose dog is this? I glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who had appeared at the sidewalk with a completely innocent expression. Oh, he just likes to explore, she said, as if my bleeding ankle were irrelevant. I looked over at Daniel, who had just arrived from the apartment. His face was pale, a mix of anger and fear. That's it, he muttered. This ends now. We realized that Mrs. Patterson had no intention of stopping this chaos. Tinker wasn't a simple nuisance. He was a tool of harassment, and she was orchestrating it. The next few days were a blur. We installed cameras, fortified every entrance, and tried to anticipate every possible way Tinker could invade our space. We even spoke to our neighbors, warning them to watch for him, but many shrugged it off. It's just a Chihuahua, they said. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patterson escalated her subtle harassment. She began letting Tinker bark incessantly at odd hours, leaving him outside our door, and even parking her car in ways that blocked our exit when we tried to leave. Each act was calculated, frustrating, and infuriating. One night, I sat on the couch exhausted as Tinker barked from the balcony above us. Daniel was asleep beside me, but I couldn't rest. I felt trapped. I hated that such a small creature, under the control of a stubborn neighbor, could dominate our lives so thoroughly. Finally, I made the decision that I would no longer tolerate this. I grabbed the camera footage, the logs of Tinker's invasions, and even photos of Mrs. Patterson's actions. Daniel woke up to find me pacing. We have evidence, I said firmly. We can't just keep living like this. We're going to take this to the city animal control and the homeowners association. He nodded slowly, the exhaustion in his eyes giving way to determination. It's time. We've tried reasoning, we've tried ignoring it. This is the only way. And so, we began preparing our case. Every scratch, every chewed item, every bite mark, every home invasion was documented. We even captured Tinker in the act of escaping Mrs. Patterson's control. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. The day we filed the complaint felt surreal. We handed over our evidence to the city animal control office, explaining the repeated invasions, injuries, and harassment. The woman taking our case listened attentively. It's about neighbor behavior as well. We'll investigate both. Relief washed over me, but I knew this wouldn't be immediate. Mrs. Patterson had already begun to realize we were fighting back. That afternoon, I saw her through the window, standing outside with Tinker, who looked unusually alert. Leaves were thrown over our yard fence. Tinker would bark from her porch for hours, his tiny voice echoing. But then it escalated. Packages we ordered were left hanging on her property, forcing confrontations. The tension was almost unbearable. Daniel and I were constantly on edge, watching our every move and calculating every step. It was exhausting, but we were determined. Finally, after weeks of investigation, animal control came to our building. Her expression shifted from condescension to shock, and then to anger. This is ridiculous! Dog! She shouted. The officers were calm but firm. He is not harmless if he is attacking neighbors and trespassing repeatedly. We are issuing a fine and requiring proper containment and training immediately. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Daniel squeezed my hand. With the authorities involved, we finally felt empowered. We could reclaim our space. We didn't fear opening the door. Mrs. Patterson, furious and humiliated, retreated into her own world. Tinker was finally controlled, and the chaos that had dominated our lives slowly faded. It wasn't just about a dog. Daniel and I learned how powerful persistence could be. And though it took months of extreme frustration, the victory was undeniably satisfying. That night, as we sat on our couch, drinking tea and laughing quietly, I realized something important. We hadn't just survived the Chihuahua. We had grown. But we knew better. And we also knew that, no matter how small the opponent, courage and patience could win even the most extreme battles. That night, as we sat on our couch, drinking tea and laughing quietly, I realized something important. We hadn't just survived the Chihuahua. We had grown stronger as a team, learned to trust ourselves, and reclaimed our peace. Tinker, now leashed and calm under supervision, trotted past our window as if he were just another dog. But we knew better. And we also knew that no matter how small the opponent, courage and patience could win even the most extreme battles. After the city authorities intervened, life slowly began to return to some version of normal. But normal after months of chaos is a delicate thing. Like a glass that has been cracked and glued back together, it's functional. But you know it has been broken. The first week after the ruling was surreal. Tinker was leashed whenever he left Mrs. Patterson's apartment, and the Chihuahua's barking was now limited to reasonable hours. For the first time in months, I could sit on my balcony and enjoy my morning coffee without jumping every time a shadow moved in the street. Daniel and I reveled in the quiet, but the aftershocks of the ordeal lingered. Our nerves were frayed. Every time a dog barked nearby, I flinched. Every time a neighbor approached with a complaint or comment, Daniel and I exchanged wary glances, bracing ourselves. It was as if the trauma had seeped into our bones. We started small, intentional steps to reclaim our sense of safety and autonomy. We put up wallpaper around the apartment, rearranged furniture, and added new locks, not out of paranoia, but to restore a feeling of control. Even these mundane acts felt like victories. Every time we opened a door without fear, every time we walked past our yard without anxiety, we were healing. We also began reflecting on what had happened. It was hard not to feel a mix of anger and disbelief. How could such a small creature, paired with such a stubborn, manipulative human, wreak so much havoc in our lives? And how did we allow ourselves to endure months of stress before taking decisive action? I realized that it wasn't just about Tinker. It was about boundaries. About recognizing when someone, human or otherwise, is exploiting your patience and testing your limits. Mrs. Patterson had used the dog as a tool of harassment. But in a way, she had also inadvertently taught us resilience. Daniel and I made a conscious decision to reclaim not only our apartment, but also our peace of mind. We stopped avoiding our own space out of fear. We started hosting friends again, inviting them into our home without anxiety. Every gathering felt like a small rebellion against the months of stress we had endured. The turning point in our recovery came one evening when Daniel and I sat on our balcony, watching the sunset over the city. Tinker was trotting down the street, leashed and calm beside Mrs. Patterson. For a fleeting moment, he looked like any other dog, not the terror that had haunted our lives. "I never thought I'd say this," Daniel said quietly, "but I think we've actually won." I laughed, the sound light and free for the first time in months. "We have," I agreed. "We faced a tiny monster, a manipulative neighbor, and a nightmare of our own making. And we survived. Stronger, calmer, and maybe a little wiser. But life, as it always does, had one last twist waiting for us. One Saturday morning we discovered that Mrs. Patterson had moved out. Apparently, the city had issued her multiple fines for violations and harassment. We didn't know the exact details, but seeing the U-Haul pull away from her empty apartment felt like closing a chapter we never wanted to write. Tinker was gone too, likely moved with her, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness for the little creature. Despite the chaos, it had been a dog just being a dog, misused by someone who couldn't take responsibility. With the neighborhood quiet and our apartment finally peaceful, Daniel and I could finally breathe. For the first time in half a year we felt free. Free from Tinker, free from Mrs. Patterson, free from the anxiety that had clung to us like a shadow. Months passed, and the experience with Tinker and Mrs. Patterson became a story we told with a mix of disbelief and humor. Whenever friends asked about the crazy Chihuahua incident, we laughed, remembering the chaos that had once ruled our lives. Life had returned to a steady rhythm. Daniel was thriving in his new position at work, and my freelance projects were going well. Our home, once a battleground, had become a sanctuary. We decorated it with care, adding plants, cozy blankets, and furniture that didn't need constant repair. Each element symbolized reclaiming our space from months of intrusion. I noticed, though, that we carried subtle lessons from the ordeal. We were more assertive with neighbors, more confident in setting boundaries, and more aware of the importance of documenting conflicts before they spiraled. Tinker had been a small, chaotic teacher in an extreme course on resilience and strategy. 1. Morning, Daniel and I sat on our balcony, coffee cups in hand, watching children play in the street below. The peace was almost dizzying. "I can't believe we went through all that," Daniel reminisced. "I know," I replied. "But maybe it was necessary. We didn't just survive. We learned how to protect ourselves, and we did it together." The months of fear and frustration had also strengthened our bond. Daniel and I trusted each other more deeply. We had faced extreme circumstances together and emerged stronger. Every plan we made, every decision to act, and every small victory had reinforced the fact that we were a team. We also had the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. Mrs. Patterson had been held accountable for her negligence and harassment, and Tinker was finally safe under supervision, no longer a weapon of chaos. It was a rare victory in life, complete, fair, and undeniably satisfying. And for me and Daniel, that victory wasn't just about controlling a tiny dog. It was about reclaiming their lives from manipulation, asserting boundaries, and finding peace after months of relentless stress. It was a reminder that even in extreme, frustrating, and seemingly hopeless situations, persistence, strategy, and courage could prevail. As we sipped our coffee, the sun casting a golden glow over the street, I realized that the ordeal had left an indelible mark, not in fear or trauma, but in confidence and resilience. Life was unpredictable, and neighbors could be difficult, but we had discovered our capacity to face challenges head-on and emerge victorious. And as Tinker's stray hairs lingered in our apartment, I smiled knowing we had not only survived a tiny terror but had also transformed our lives. The nightmare was over, and the peace we had fought for was finally ours. Daniel reached over and held my hand. "We did it," he said. "Yes," I said, squeezing back. "We did, and we're stronger because of it." For the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed it.